There aren't enough people speaking out against these food products, and for good reason. These products make a lot of money. When we talk about vegetable oils, what we actually mean is vegetable seed oils.
So I recently changed the order in our dietary summary for our weight loss and metabolic health clinic. So now the first point, and so the most important thing you do to make a change in order to become healthy and lose fat is cut out vegetable oils from your diet. Soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, corn oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil, peanut oil, grapeseed oil, rapeseed oil, and so on. These oils are very high in omega-6 linoleic acid, which cannot be burned as fuel but accumulates in our cells and causes weight gain and disease. And actually turns out that it causes insulin resistance. It also turns out that it causes neurologic disorders.
Look at this marketing. We bring a taste of the country to every family table. We start with simple, farm-grown ingredients and slow churn them in Kansas to make delicious, rich, creamy, buttery spreads for everyone to enjoy. It's soybean oil. Is this a joke? They literally use soybean oil to induce oxidative stress in cholesterol. Same with the corn oil. They're telling people it's healthy. The public is convinced the opposite of the truth. This stuff is poison. Toxins, pesticides, herbicides are stored in fat. When you take GMO soybeans that have been doused in agrochemicals, press them into oil, you are creating the most toxic substance that we consume on a daily basis.
So the reason that I changed this, that the number one step is to cut these oils out, is that I found in my patients that were trying to lose fat and become healthier that this was the biggest hindrance that they had. It also made them crave foods. It made them eat more. It contributed so significantly to their eating patterns that once we cut those out, people did a lot better and they became healthier. But it does take time because these fats, they sit in our fat cells, and again, we don't really metabolize them, so they can sit there for up to 2 years or so. So it's a slow process to really get rid of them.
Canola oil is used as biofuel. Safflower oil was used in the paint industry. Soybean oil is a byproduct. Now, there are some plant-based oils that aren't nearly as bad, such as olive oil, coconut oil. This has to do with how the product is made and the omega fatty acid profile. To make soybean oil, you have to crack the soybeans, heat them, roll them into flakes, solvent extract the oil with hexanes, which is a type of gasoline, then refine and deodorize the oil. Sometimes these oils are hydrogenated, adding a hydrogen atom, making it solid at room temperature, which is even more harmful to our health. But don't worry, guys. The soybean oil is hexane-free and purified. You can't forget the soybean meal that is fed to animals or used in soy protein products that vegans suck down. So many vegans are afraid of consuming oil, yet they're consuming the other poisonous soy byproduct. This is why there isn't much negative talk about vegetable seed oils. Whether you're spreading country crock on your toast or eating feedlot beef, it required byproducts of these vegetable seed oils, feeding into the pockets of the oligarchy that controls our food supply.
And when we look back to how was our diet traditionally, when we were hunters and gatherers, for example, this was really more of a 1-to-1 ratio back then, where you had 1 part omega-3 and 1 part omega-6. Then, as of the early 1900s, it began to change. We also had the delightful onset of Crisco, which is, basically comes from cottonseed oil. And why did we have cottonseed oil all of a sudden? Well, in the harvest of cotton, the seeds were left over, they didn't know what to do with them, and they said, hey, if you put some chemicals in there, we can extract oil from them. You can't just squeeze them out, use hexane or some other toxic chemical to take the oil out. And then they said, well, what do we do with this? Well, first they used it to lubricate industrial machinery. And if you want to hear the whole story about this, there is a journalist, Nina Teicholz, who's fantastic, and she wrote a book about this, and she also gives lectures, and she talks about the onset of how do we all of a sudden have these wonderful vegetable oils. So that was the onset. And anyway, so as of the early 1900s, our percentage of omega-6 was steadily rising. Now remember, we need very, very little of this. There's a reason why most animal fats have very little linoleic acid. And we only need them, again, we don't burn them, we only need them as structural and signaling molecules. But we've been steadily increasing our intake of this from about, let's say, 2 grams a day in the early 1900s to about 80 grams a day today, which is insane. So for many Americans, the majority of their fats come from these oils today. And that has been quite problematic because as we've seen the steep increase in these oils, when you follow the curves, you see that from the early 1900s to today, that is a really exponential function. As when you look at the consumption of soybean oil, canola oil, and so on, we have way more today than we ever had in the early 1900s. At the same time, in a similar fashion, we have a rise of diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disorders, neurologic disorders. And while we can always say that correlation doesn't equal causation, and I would agree with that, here the correlation is huge. I mean, it's a very, very strong correlation. And then we also understand more about the biochemistry behind it. We understand why is this happening? Why are these fats, what are they doing to the fat cells? Now, I'm a simple primary care physician, so this is way beyond my field. But when you look at how do they behave in our cells, it is usually that they accumulate in our cells. Again, we don't burn them, we don't really use them much because we only need very little of this. So the bulk of it accumulates, and actually also it oxidizes. It becomes these oils change while they're sitting in there in a negative way. They become oxidized. There's species that are produced that are quite damaging to our cells. So the fat cell, instead of normally growing and working and dividing, it grows, it becomes larger. They cause hypertrophy, so these cells become huge. And the cell, it is thought now, at the cellular level now, over time, that's where we develop insulin resistance. So we always were operating under the hypothesis that insulin resistance comes in from eating too much sugar, too much carbs. And then at some point, our pancreas burns out and we just can't make enough insulin. And now we have insulin resistance. And what's the first thing we give in someone that starts to develop type 2 diabetes? We give them medications that make the insulin work better. Or we give medications that allow more insulin to be present. Or we actually end up giving insulin as an injection later. But we don't address the issue. We don't address the issue at the level of the cell. We know that as people lose fat, as they lose weight, they become less insulin resistant. So people that have type 2 diabetes, when they diet and exercise and they lose body fat, their diabetes becomes better. And we always thought, again, this had to do with the carbohydrate intake. But it seems now more and more it really is caused by these oils that accumulate in our cells and make our cells insulin resistant. So it's at the cellular level.
My mother used to fry chicken cutlets every week in soybean oil, and my grandmother still has a giant jug of Wesson oil in her pantry. Every single restaurant uses vegetable oils to fry and cook their foods. We are consuming incredibly large amounts of a food that should have never been created. It's full of agrochemicals, has anti-nutrients like phytates, soy exhibits estrogenic properties, and is high in omega-6. You couldn't make a more poisonous food if you tried.
What do we replace them with? And again, many cardiologists might still find this very controversial, and many traditional nutritionists are going to freak out. But the best fats to replace these oils with are butter, beef tallow, coconut oil, and 100% pure avocado oil, and 100% pure extra virgin olive oil. Those I would only recommend in small amounts. I did another video about this. A lot of times when we buy them, they're not pure. They have other oils in there, and they might be expired and oxidized. So I don't really think that they're the biggest staple of our diet when it comes to fats. So how long have we known that these oils, these vegetable oils, might be problematic? And you can go back all the way to 2015 or longer. And it was actually quite interesting. So there was actually a study that was published by the University of California, Riverside. And what they found was, they did a study with rodents, and they had 4 groups of rodents. And they had one group that had a diet that was very high in soybean oil. And again, soybean oil is one of the vegetable oils that's very, very high in this omega-6 linoleic acid, as are most vegetable oils, but that's just one of them. And that's also one oil that we use in most of our food today. So it's an oil that we have in most products when we think about fats these days. The second group of rodents was a diet where the fat was coconut oil, which is a saturated fat. It's a tropical saturated fatty acid. And we still have this word saturated fat. It almost sounds like a bad word. So they gave them a diet high in that. And they had 2 other groups. They had also soybean oil or coconut oil, and the soybean oil in the third group also had a high amount of fructose, and the coconut oil in the fourth group also had a high amount of fructose. So it was either soybean oil or coconut oil, and then the third and fourth group were soybean oil plus fructose, and then coconut oil plus fructose. And the results were really fascinating, and very much went against what they kind of expected. So they looked at these rodents, throughout their whole lifespan, and saw kind of how they developed. And the interesting part was that the rodents that were fed the high soybean diet had the biggest issues. So they're writing here, compared to mice on the high coconut oil diet, mice on the high soybean diet showed increased weight gain, larger fat deposits, a fatty liver with signs of injury, diabetes, and insulin resistance, all of which are part of the metabolic syndrome. Fructose in the diet had less severe metabolic effects than soybean oil, although it did cause more negative effects in the kidney and a marked increase in prolapsed rectums, a symptom of inflammatory bowel disease, which, like obesity, is on the rise. So this was very fascinating. So again, you would expect, the rodents that were fed the coconut oil, saturated fats, that they would do a lot worse. But no, it was actually really the soybean oil. And again, this is just in rodents, of course. This was in 2015. Rodents are not, mice are not people. That's absolutely correct. However, if you want to follow a mammal throughout its lifespan and you have a significant change in one of the things that they're eating and to influence this, I would argue it's almost impossible to do this very thoroughly in humans. I mean, we cannot lock humans in a cage through the rest of their life and feed them. This is not going to happen, obviously, for many, many reasons. So we usually go back to food questionnaires. We ask, well, what have you had over the last whatever months in terms of this item and this item? And that is not very precise. So here we have a very, very tight control over the entire lifespan of these rats. And then later, as they were dissected, they could really look at the organs. They could look at everything. Besides the insulin resistance and the issues mentioned here, they also found neurologic issues. They found that the mice on the soybean diet had a lot of issues, like in humans it would be autism or Parkinson's disease. So there were neurologic issues. They did study this and found that the soybean oil really influenced about 100 different genes that were responsible for neurologic function in a negative way. So here you have now, besides the insulin resistance, you have neurologic issues in these mice. So there were other studies that had similar findings, and then we understand more and more how this works and why it is. And it's a bit complicated, but again, these omega-6 linoleic acid containing oils, and when we look at vegetable oils, they're very high in this. So they're somewhere between 20 to 40 or 45% of these oils are linoleic acid. And that's in stark contrast to animal fats. When you, for example, look at beef tallow or you look at butter, about 2% is omega-6 fats. Here, the omega-6 is much, much, much higher.
Not only are you poisoning yourself and disrupting your hormones, this omega-6 is mostly composed of linoleic acid, a fatty acid that does not occur in natural human diets in significant amounts. As we can see, natural foods like butter and coconut oil have about 2% linoleic acid, where vegetable seed oils have dozens of times the amount of linoleic acid that should naturally occur in the diet. You are what you eat. If you consume vegetable seed oils in high amounts, all of the fats, the lipids in your body, including cholesterol, will turn into linoleic acid. If your LDL particle contains linoleic acid, your body converts it into HOD. 9-HOD and 13-HOD are metabolites that form under oxidative stress. Once linoleic acid becomes oxidized in LDL, aldehydes and ketones covalently bind ApoB, creating LDL that is no longer recognized by the LDL receptors in the liver, but is now recognized by scavenger receptors on macrophages, leading to the classic foam cell formation and atherosclerosis, aka heart disease. The content of 9-HOD in the LDL of atherosclerotic patients aged between 69 and 94 years increased 30 to 100-fold when compared with young, healthy individuals. Interestingly, studies have shown the animal form of omega-6, arachidonic acid, has prevented this oxidation of the plant omega-6 linoleic acid. Plant version bad, animal version good. the opposite of what everyone believes.
I see in my clinic patients that have a hard time losing body fat and that have metabolic syndrome, they might have other issues. As we cut out those oils religiously, they read every package. They avoid buying packaged food. They go back to really, really simple whole foods that includes, some meats, butter, tallow, as I mentioned before. In terms of carbohydrates, they simplify it as well. Fruit is always okay, like in small amounts, earlier part of the day. And then oats maybe, and maybe like a simple rye bread. So simple single ingredient carbohydrates like fruit, oats, or maybe rye. There's a Vasa rye bread that I usually recommend. That's it. That's all the carbs they have. They cut out the simple sugars, they cut out the refined flours and all that. And then in terms of fats, again, they kick out all those vegetable oils and stick with simple animal fats or coconut oil, small amounts of avocado oil or olive oil, and they drastically lose body fat. They become healthier. Their hemoglobin A1C becomes better. Their fasting insulin becomes better. It is a huge difference. And that's why I moved that point to the number one of the list, because I think it is so critically important to start with cutting out the ingredient that makes us insulin resistant, that makes us become fat, that makes us starving all the time, hungry. Because remember, we don't burn this. This is not, calories that we easily use. So they're sitting around and they're causing disease. So, we become more hungry, and since we're insulin resistant, sugar now doesn't get in the cells. So we can't burn that. So we're eating more because now we're starving. So it's a very vicious cycle.
If we can't even convince the public not to suck down this poison, we will never move in a positive direction for our health. Yes, sugar's bad, white flour's bad. There's so many inflammatory plant foods in our diets now, whether it's because of anti-nutrients like lectins and beans, how we make our modern hybridized wheat, whatever it is. All of this stuff pales in comparison to how dangerous vegetable seed oils are. And they're in everything. You go to McDonald's, it's in the bun. You buy honey buns, you buy any processed food in the store, chances are it has some type of vegetable seed oil. It's in Beyond Meat, the new plant-based burgers. It comprises most of the calories. It's in our meat. It's in our pork. It's in our chicken. It's in our beef, because we're feeding the animals the vegetable seed oils. You cannot avoid this poison. You go buy your Butterball turkey for Thanksgiving, you're sucking down linoleic acid. It's never ending. I don't know if this, out of every single thing that's negative in our diets now, it's so big and the infrastructure is just so conducive to making money at this point that they don't have an alternative. We all know how stubborn people can be, how reluctant people can be to change, how there's special interest groups, and of course, inherent human selfishness and laziness. The amount of money required to spend, the amount of effort required to research, nobody wants to do this. There is resistance on every single side of this. The people in control are spending a lot of money to prevent anything positive from happening, and the people that are under this control are okay with it because they don't want to change. They're apparently happy doing what they're doing now. I don't know. I'm losing my mind, guys. This is completely crazy that it's not, and you can't convince people either. You can have a conversation with someone, and the appeal to authority and the conventional wisdom, no matter what comes out of my mouth, I could be telling you how to make $10 million in a week, and people don't listen to you because that's just how it is. What are you going to do?
And cutting out these oils has been very, very valuable in my clinic. And I think it should be the most important thing you do when you reevaluate your diet. And if you want to lose fat and become healthy, I'd highly recommend to start right there. So my last two videos I talked about the 4 fats that I generally recommend to anyone on a healthy diet, trying to lose weight and eating healthy fats in the low-carb diet. And they are butter, avocado oil, coconut oil, and olive oil. And I was corrected on the olive oil. So I say I typically don't cook with it, that at higher temperatures it's not quite that stable. I did a lot of reading on this, and actually you can cook with olive oil. The literature doesn't seem to show that there is a big risk of cooking with it, that anything bad happens. So you can. Again, always look at the smoke point. For olive oil, it's like 325 to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. However, in your pan and when you're cooking, you don't easily get to that. You would have to measure this with a thermometer and all that. the point is usually when things start to smoke, when you see like a darker smoke rising up, turn the heat down. I mean, that's just too hot, you know. So you can't cook with it. Also, of course, avocado oil, and this was pointed out to me as well, is quite expensive, and I agree with that. I think it's an excellent oil, and so when you cook with it, you know, once in a while, I would definitely use that. I think it's an excellent oil to consume, but it costs a bit more, which brings me to ghee. So somebody else said, well, you talk about butter, and that's great, but what about ghee? And I've bought ghee before, but I tell you, at least in my experience, ghee is more expensive. What is ghee? Ghee essentially is clarified butter. What does that mean? They just basically take all the solids that are still in the butter, you know, the casein and the lactose remnants that are still in there, and just have the pure fat. And that is giving you a few advantages. One, I mean, you don't have the lactose, which we don't really like. That's a milk sugar. However, there's very small amounts in there, I must say. And then, you know, the casein, some of the proteins. So if you have an allergy or incompatibility to lactose or other ingredients in dairy, then ghee might give you an advantage because it's just, you know, they took it out essentially. Does it make a big difference? I really don't think so. When you look at a stick of butter or when you read the label on butter, it pretty much has no carbohydrates in it. If there was a very high amount, let's say, of lactose in there, we would see a higher carbohydrate content. I think the amounts are fairly small, and the price difference is fairly significant. If you buy butter, I recommend to get butter from grass-fed cows because there is a high amount of vitamin K2, which is a very important vitamin, and butter is an excellent source of that. If you have the money for it, ghee is probably the better choice. I personally mostly stick with butter because it's cheaper, easier. And, you know, but that's really absolutely everyone's personal choice, I suppose. Both are absolutely fine, I believe. They're good fats. And then again, as for the olive oil, yes, you can cook with it. There's not really a big downside to it. Any oil that you cook with, you know, whether it's coconut oil, avocado oil, butter specifically is much on the lower side. When it starts getting to a smoky point, turn the heat down. So thank you for the corrections, and I will see you next time.